With respect to the previous presentation, there are some points to note, I guess. I'll endeavour to strap them together in an as interesting and pertinent way as possible. The first point relates to the registration of the field structure, or indeed its absence, within the 5 image elements. Only the central presentation with fixation on the fish is taking place in time now, or real time, with respect to the real setting. So what's appearing here is largely being diagnosed from input data from the real setting streaming through the 2 visual pathways. Only this presentation requires us to distill spatial information from the noise field, incident from the environment. Hence only this element of the painting contains evidence of this processing in action. By this I mean the underpainting of the all possibilities field, from which the spatial values emerge. The other elements are essentially mental images, requiring recollections from short and long-term memory. In these elements, either values are not there to be recalled, or they're not there because what's being recalled doesn't contain evidence of the process. So we can perhaps consider the structure of mental imagery being in some respects distinct from imagery deriving in real time from the environment. This may be one of the ways we distinguish what's actually happening to us from what's coming from memory or the result of dreaming. Whilst this is interesting in itself, we have to extrapolate from this. It is highly unlikely that our artificial stimuli will ever deliver the embedded information potential from which we derive implicit spatial awareness. So artificial stimuli won't fire up the visual processes in a way commensurate with experiential encounter. So the brain is operating atypically when it processes imagery, even vision space imagery, where the spatial values are presented to be read, as opposed to diagnosed from raw input. So what would happen if we lived out our lives totally immersed in what we are incorrectly terming virtual reality? Answer: neuroredundancy, a lack of implicit spatial awareness and so ability to integrate sensory data. We would also expect to encounter compensation in the form of a related overdevelopment of the remaining pathway, and so the emergence of atypical perceptual structure. This tending towards disorientation, overload, and inability to communicate, resulting in social isolation. We are doing this to ourselves. This would suggest that the structure of much of our information is inherently toxic. The implications could not be more profound or more pressing, and there's a corresponding level of urgency with respect to validation. So back to our relationship with the real. To some extent, we can work out the efficacy of what's occurring to us as visual imagery, along with the derivation of the source data forming it. The real world, images made of it, memory or creative dreaming. What does this imply? That to some degree, we can watch ourselves experiencing what's presenting. Obviously, the degree to which an individual can do this will vary. Visual artists train this capability to watch the processes of presentation occurring as conscious visual awareness, and have developed strategies to depict these processes together with the nature of the data potentials involved. What's required now is a new form of illusionary space within which all of these factors can find a home and be used to develop our culture and communication systems. Imagine all these elements playing out as moving image components on a large screen, building situational awareness enhanced with past experience. This conceptual inquiry about the situation constitutes a train of thought, and is conducted separately from the perceptual encounter. However, outcomes from an abstracted thought can feed back and even influence what's perceived in time now, i.e. thinking about a situation can contribute to the material content of the experience. So we are watching a mind forming experiential reality, which is a form of self-reference. What's missing now are the visual self-reference cues relating to the physical presence of the individual. There's a glimpse here of my foot and overalls, but I've looked at these issues in some detail in other paintings and presentations. If their inclusion in simulation could be linked to the body movements of the individual, they'd become owned and infinitely more suggestive. We could perhaps now take a look at how we deal with the contemplation of objective form and build spatial awareness through binocular disparity. Again, there's a lot of stuff on this in former presentations and publications, so I'll just point up a few specifics. First, we understand that what the left eye sees is presented on the left-hand side of phenomenal field and vice versa. I colour these up separately when I plot out a painting. We also know there's a stereo zone, where the individual fields of left and right eyes overlap, but with slightly different viewing angles. This facilitates greater awareness of 3D. However, as we understand, there are no pictures in vision to fuse, so the 3D saliency of vision can have nothing to do with 3D fusion and its related technologies. Within the stereo zone of phenomenal field, we can identify alternation zones, where information from either eye is alternated over time. Here we can clearly see information from the right eye entered within the left eye half or territory of phenomenal field, and vice versa. We use the disparity to make judgment calls between the experiential differential over time. So look now at the circular tabletop. It's actually constructed from 6 independent arcs. Well, 2 views interlaced with each other. This interlacing changing over time, with the activity taking place in the alternation zones. Moment to moment, we don't see the disconnects, even between the uprights forming the window frame, or at least we don't attend to it. We attend to the spatial advantage we get from the interplay. If we started to investigate a disconnect, the brain would shift the alternative view back into the area of phenomenal field, i.e. the disconnect would vanish. Between the alternation zones lies central or macular vision, where we modulate information over time. This being the process whereby we contemplate and build awareness of objective form and our explicit take on reality. It's responsible for the asymmetries of objects appearing in an artist's still life, or the non-alignment of facial features in portraiture. In the same way here, we can see that if we fixate on the top of the jug, the bottom gets wider. If we were to look at its base, the width of the neck would diminish or even disappear. Look at the rendition of the vase when the fixation is made on the fish. Half the vase is in the stereo alternation zone and half outside it. So the different views don't align, and the bottom is almost lost, where at the top we start to appreciate 2 renditions of the throat. The same is true of the cutting board on the other side, but in reverse. The lemon has practically disappeared. Alternation and modulation are processes of information exchange that occur across phenomenal field, helping us to appreciate objective form and derive spatial awareness from disparity. Here we can see an early implementation of these processes in technology and moving images, where we had to identify something about how the mind deals with and masks the interchange between all the potential views of an object. Over time, the left-hand mug should become appreciably more 3D. The trick is, of course, to change the view as imperceptibly as possible, whilst ensuring that the ordering of the views complies with that operational in the perceptual build process. All of this will give us a totally different take on what psychologists term change blindness. But in there lies enough for an entire presentation, if not a book. So what about the setting into which all the elements sit? It's indicative, of course. What else could it be? We are deconstructing multidimensional phase space, flattening it out so that information held within what forms or is contained in the boundaries can be attended to. What resides there belongs there, but clearly plays out and contributes to experiential awareness and hence communication. Are different arrangements possible to conceive of? Of course there are. Our future communication systems will perhaps reflect this possible diversity. I should also mention the issue relating to condensation across visual field. This is handled in some depth in other presentations, but as I was setting out the drawing for this, I came across a best practice tip for marking perceptually accurate key positions within phenomenal field. When plotting a drawing, we naturally unfold the scene to gain proportionality, a process that obscures the condensation, leading inexorably to the imposition of the geometry of perspective and the rise of so-called realism. I resolved the position of the window head by finding the experiential diagonal from fixation to where the corner of the window frame was occurring within my contextual field of vision. I simply copied this onto the surface of the drawing, seen here in purple. The diagonal establishes the intersection with respect to the drawn line marking the vertical edge of the frame. i.e. the process cuts out what I think about the situation to record what's actually occurring to me on a perceptual basis. It's perhaps no wonder that so much effort went into a system of drawing that overcame this apparent distortion of the physically real, to better reflect the physical relationship between objects within the environment. Once this issue of proportionality was sorted, it was possible to ignore all the indistinct stuff around central vision. Surely that was just a degraded form of clarity available to us within central vision. Let's term all that contextual, blurry, indistinct stuff peripheral. Forget about it, and move on. The resulting unfolded conceptualizations about the world are, however, a distortion from perceptual structure, and not the other way round. In setting out the geometry of picture space, we moved away from the experiential encounter, setting up a remote observer position. Third-party observation then expanded into an ontology all of its own, spawning technologies and records that then stood in for us at all scales. For me, the depiction of the lions from the Chauveau cave and the painting by Picasso from Antibes are not copies or homage. For me, they belong here. They reside here. They've extended their reach while reinstating and reaffirming their original intent. That content includes aspects of the mind that created the marks. It's perhaps ironic to some that contained within what's been dispensed with in order to clearly and accurately examine the real lies what we now require to move that process on.